Hi, everyone. This is Farah Harris, licensed therapist. I am excited about today because I am joined by Dr. Ann-Louise Lockhart, PsyD. She is the owner of a New Day Pediatric Psychology. And this month is May, Mental Health Awareness Month. And we're excited because I had posted on my Facebook page, the business page, if any of the followers had any thoughts or questions that they wanted addressed regarding mental health. And there was a very good question about how do adults ADHD or those who have adult ADHD, how does it present itself at work? Now, that is not necessarily the population that I work with. I do work with those who struggle with maybe anxiety or depression or just adjusting through life. But I know Ann works with this population from young to old. So I thought it would be best to get someone who's really more familiar and is in that niche to explain to us, what does ADHD look like when we are now an adult? Because we kind of have an idea with kids, but as adults, what does that look like?
So that's a very common question. I work a lot with kids who have ADHD and adolescents, but also with adults, because the whole key in looking at ADHD is that the brain, the frontal lobe of the brain, is what's affected by ADHD because it doesn't fully finish growing and developing until age 26. All the other lobes are done. So the frontal lobe is responsible for emotional regulation, impulse control, personality, decision-making, judgment, time management. And so all the really important things take a while to form and develop. And so when someone is a child growing into adolescence and into adulthood, if they don't learn the right coping skills, then they become adults with poor coping skills.
So that's a bit of neuroscience for you guys to
Yes.
understand what's going on and what I call the boss part of our brain, the CEO. So if we're not able to figure out how to use logic and reasoning in the best way, like, so you're saying, like, as children move into adolescence and then they move to adulthoods, they're kind of not stuck per se, but very, this becomes their pattern.
Exactly. So when I'm working with kids and adolescents who have ADHD, and then they also have parents with ADHD, but the parents don't realize it, sometimes it can become a bit of a struggle because now, since your brain has stopped growing around age 26 and you're kind of set in your ways, it's hard to deviate from that because your brain isn't pruning and modifying learning experiences as quickly as it was between 0 and 26. So you kind of get stuck in your ways and your patterns. So the thing about ADHD that's really cool is that you don't really outgrow ADHD. You don't necessarily become cured of ADHD, but you can learn to better live with it and live successfully with it.
Yeah. And I want to add something to your point, because we talked about this in an earlier conversation about, like, the neuroplasticity of the brain.
Yes.
So not that you're necessarily stuck there, but you made a good point about how rapidly, our brains are evolving and learning from the different experiences that we have, and that it's not that it doesn't continue to develop, but it takes longer.
Right. Exactly. So if you are 3, 4, 5-year-old and you're learning a second or third language, you're more likely to learn it quickly as opposed to being 45 and trying to learn a new language. You can still do it, but it takes a lot more effort because the malleability, the flexibility of the brain is not primed to do that. So that's why it takes, when people are like, oh, I'm just stuck in my ways. Well, you kind of are, because you've been practicing it for so long. And what we know is that we tend to really become really good at the thing we practice. So if you keep practicing a certain behavior, good and bad, then you kind of get stuck in that way of coping, whether it's healthy or unhealthy. So every time you get stressed, if you smoke or drink or overeat, it becomes easy because that's your default, as opposed to you get stressed and you go for a run and you eat a salad, then that becomes your default.
Did you get that, everyone? That is a great nugget that Dr. Ann-Louise has dropped on us, because I think we do try to justify certain behaviors, especially as we get older.
Right.
It's like you said, I'm stuck in my ways. This is just how I am. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way.
Exactly.
You can create new habits.
Right. It just takes more effort when you're a grown-up, because then you're like, okay, no, I can't do that. And we learn that, as kids, we're growing up in our household, the way we interact with coworkers, the way we interact with students, the way we interact with friends and our spouse and our kids, it's because we've been primed for that. We've been like practicing it throughout our lifetime. So that's why, you know, there's certain things that people are like, oh, every time my heart gets broken, I isolate. That probably was the way you handle things when you were a kiddo. And so it becomes easier to go that way. And if you don't want to do that, you have to be more intentional about not doing that every time it happens.
Yes, intentionality is so important.
Exactly.
So what does that look like if you have a coworker or an employer that has ADHD? Now, in this circumstance, per the question that I received, this person stated it was due to that their aggressive or antagonistic personality was due to their ADHD. Is that a feature or a characteristic of that disorder?
No, and I think that's a big misconception, is that people attribute so many negative qualities to a lot of mental health diagnoses. And some of them, yes, just like anybody though. I mean, whether you have a mental health diagnosis or not, some people are a little quirky, some people are very positive, some people are not so positive. So we all have our positives and negatives, right? So I think that people think that when you have ADHD that, oh, they're naturally obnoxious or they're naturally arrogant or they're naturally antagonistic. That's not true. That's a personality trait. That's not an ADHD.
Listen to the doctor. It is not a ADHD trait at all. And so, you know, like you said, it's definitely something related to your personality, not necessarily the personality disorder, which is a whole different thing.
That's a whole different thing.
But it could be definitely something related to that person's personality.
Exactly. But remember, keep in mind the frontal lobe, which is where ADHD, and it's not just the frontal lobe. I mean, it's all parts of the brain that are kind of communicating to each other. But a large part of ADHD is an underactive, understimulated frontal lobe. But that's also where personality is. So if you have an obnoxious personality and you happen to have ADHD, then you're going to be an obnoxious person with ADHD. But
but you're not obnoxious because of the ADHD.
No, it's because you just are. But you could be a highly patient, highly gracious person with ADHD.
Yeah.
And so it's not mutually exclusive. It's not one or the same, you know. But you know, like you had asked earlier, what are some like signs or symptoms or features of ADHD with adults? So what we know is that there's 3 types of ADHD. There's inattentive type, there's hyperactive impulsive type, and there's combined type. Okay. So as we get older, the hyperactive impulsive tends to get better with age because our brain is growing and maturing. So people who are adults, they rarely have the hyperactive impulsive type.
Okay.
Because you're not going to see like a 45-year-old man like moving all over the place and like crazy. Like sometimes you will, but it often will show up more like anxiety or restlessness. Okay, like they can't sit still through a teacher staff meeting or through, you know, they're always getting into accidents on the road because they're like always scanning all the time. But typically with adults, you'll see more of the inattentive, kind of like, quote, ditzy, la la land, unfocused type person.
And so, I think you mentioned too, you know, just the difficulty to maybe get tasks done on time.
Yes. Yes. And we talked about yesterday when we were kind of preparing for today is that there's what they call some soft signs of ADHD. So we have like the official diagnostic criteria where you have to meet a bunch of different criteria to be diagnosed. But with adult ADHD, some things that you might see are like they drink large amounts of caffeine to feel chill or calm. People without ADHD, if we drink caffeine, we get jittery.
Wired.
Get chill. Right. We get wired.
Yeah.
Heart races, everything. For them, they actually get chilled because it's a stimulant. So it stimulates their brain, which helps calm them down. It has like this opposite effect.
Yeah.
Right. Another feature is that they get very hyper focused, which is often can be issues in the workplace or in a marital relationship, for example, because that person with ADHD gets so focused on what they're doing, everything else gets forgotten. So they're working on the bills, but they don't hear the baby crying, or they're, you know, so focused on the project that you gave them that now there's another project that's a higher priority and they can't switch. They can't do that kind of mental shift.
So it's almost like tunnel vision.
Very much. Very much so. Everybody has left the office and they're still working in there and they're like, oh snap, I didn't even realize the office closed down. Like they get so hyper focused. So ADHD is not that they can't focus, it's that they have the inability to regulate their attention.
That's really good, because I think people would have that misconception that they would just be all over the place, that they would start something and then start another thing and they would never finish a task.
And that's part of it.
That is part of it. But then on the other end, it could also have an appearance of just almost being very strict and single-minded.
Right.
Like, I have to do this first before I can, like you said, switch and go to the next thing. That's really good, because I don't think people attribute that to ADHD.
No, they don't. And it's like a spectrum. I mean, you're either very inattentive and you can't finish anything, or you get so hyper-focused that nothing else gets done. One thing, right?
Yeah.
Another part of their kind of the soft signs are they often tend to get a lot of moving violations, so a lot of traffic speeding tickets, because they're not, again, that's regulation. You have to notice what the speed limit is, what the road conditions are, how heavy your foot is on the gas, all the different things that are going around you, that the cop is clocking people coming down the road, and just kind of noticing all that. And they often will have a lot of those kinds of speeding tickets and moving violations because of that. Another one is, I was writing some of these down. One of them is that they tend to be very hypersensitive, especially to rejection, or when told something is wrong.
Yeah.
And then they can go into this like dysphoric mood, like a real depressed down mood.
I think that's really important that you share that, because again, in the workplace, what does that look like? So you have an employee that works for you. How can you communicate with them so that it doesn't, quote unquote, trigger that part of their ADHD?
Right. And so I think that's where it's really important to make sure that you're not sharing your work is good, but it's more that you're praising them for what they're doing, for the specific effort that they're going through. And what we see is that we just need to work a little bit more in this area.
Yeah.
So that way you're not just focusing all on the positive and all on the negative, but you're also don't want to be like walking on eggshells around these individuals either. But to also realize that any kind of rejection or things, perception of failure could be very triggering, especially because of childhood issues too. Because a lot of these kids with ADHD feel stupid, they feel unintelligent, they feel they don't do anything right. And there is a higher incidence of depression in this population. And that will carry over into adulthood, because then that will trigger them when they feel like, oh, great, I failed again.
Yeah. And, that goes to, the work that I do, that definitely I do, CBT, but narrative is very important to me. It's like, what is my story? And the person with ADHD, their story or their external story has been, you can't focus, you're not smart, you're not this. And so now we have adults who replay this narrative in their mind. And it's not because they're not smart, but maybe they've not necessarily had the opportunities to gain tools to better manage. Because as you were talking, I was like, mindfulness, when you're talking about the speeding, like, oh, how much pressure am I putting on the pedal? What's going on? That practicing some mindfulness would help someone with ADHD. Totally.
So then when I'm focused on a project, let myself know that if I tend to get hyper-focused, that's my default.
Yeah.
Okay, it's now 12:30. I want to make sure I work on this for 1 hour. So then I have to be mindful of what I'm doing, and then I just focus on this project. I don't allow myself to get kind of derailed. But then when the alarm goes off, I need to do a mindset shift and do something different.
But
so
that goes,
way you're at least keep
but that goes back to what you said about intentionality.
Exactly. Another sign too is that they tend to, ADHD, and we talked about this the other day, is that ADHD tends to look a lot like OCD or anxiety. And they can get mislabeled or pathologized incorrectly. One of my biggest pet peeve is people who just want to give people a whole bunch of diagnoses. Like, not everybody has a diagnosis just because they have a quirk.
Yes.
Okay.
Tell it to the people.
Yes. So, just because someone is neat doesn't mean they're OCD. Just because someone likes to be safe and scan their environment doesn't make them anxious. It just, they're conscious. Right. Exactly. So ADHD can look very anxiety-like, especially in adults, but also with kids, because usually when I assess kids to see if they have ADHD, I'm also ruling out is it anxiety, because they look very similar. So they have a lot of that anxiety, OCD-like symptoms, because they're check, recheck, check, recheck. Make sure I didn't mess this up. Make sure I didn't mess up the payroll. Make sure I didn't mess up my timesheet. And they kind of get over, because sometimes it's that replaying the message. I'm always messing up. I'm always not paying attention. I'm always whatever it is. And so then they sometimes will overcompensate for that. And it looks like OCD or anxiety-like behavior.
That's really good, because
Yeah.
I think that's the issue that we have, whether it's children or with adults, but when we're misdiagnosed, how unhelpful that is,
Yes.
because you can have somebody with anxiety, but if you're giving them medication for ADHD, it's not going to help them.
No.
And so it's like, well, why is this not working? Well, you've misdiagnosed them. This is not their issue. So really being able to understand what the person's mental process is, as a clinician, for us to really be able to like, okay, now I can understand that though these may look like similar behaviors, they're not the same root.
Right, exactly. And even the function of the behavior, we always want to make sure that when someone is doing something, you don't just attribute it to them being a jerk or arrogant or slob or, right. It's like, why are they doing it? Why did they mess this up? Or why did they procrastinate? Or why did they wait till the last minute? Like, what is the function of that behavior? And then really looking at helping them problem solve so that they're not continuing that behavior too.
Yes.
And, a big part too of a lot of this is they tend to get very overwhelmed and they get a lot of sensory overload.
Yes.
So if you have a bunch of, like in the workplace, if you have a bunch of people who are always like yakking it up and love socializing, and then you have someone has ADHD, they're going to get very distracted by that, especially if there's food in the break room, people are talking, there's music going on, and then there's like construction going on outside, and then their fluorescent light in their office is flickering, and then a funky smell coming from somewhere. Then, all of that is a sensory overload. And they will tend to shut down or get more irritated or agitated on edge because their senses just can't handle it, which is what a lot of parents see with their kiddos with ADHD who are well behaved at school and a wreck at home, is that they're trying to keep it together all day long.
Yes.
And then they come home and they let it rip. They save it all up for you.
Yes, because you're the safe place. When we're talking about children, home is a safe, hopefully home is a safe space. And so, when we're talking, quickly digressing, but when we're talking, to parents, I don't work with a lot of children, but I work with adults who may have children. And, so the stuff that they bring into the room, sometimes we end up having, a session that has to do with parenting. And like, well, why is my kid doing this? Why is my kid doing that? And it's like, what if you are their safe space? And children kind of push the limits because they kind of trust you. Like, I can be my everything, my good, bad, and ugly, and bring it to you, and harm won't happen. I don't know what will happen to me if I act out in school.
Right. And you will accept me at home regardless. You are unconditionally loving me. And that's, of course, everything being equal and everything being safe at home, like you said. But, you are required to love me even when I'm a jerk to you.
Yes, pretty much. And so, but then what I want to have takeaways, because I think we could have another call, because I really would love to talk about the other part of the question was, how do you deal with I love that she said the invisible illnesses, with like mental illness, and what does that look like in the workplace? But I think today is just a great educational video on what ADHD looks like, what it looks like in adults, how it can manifest in individuals in the workplace. What tips would you have for someone who has ADHD and is trying to manage their ADHD, at work?
Right. Well, I think a big part of it is to make sure they have a well-balanced lifestyle. That, one thing that really will make ADHD worse is lack of sleep.
I think that's for everyone.
That's for everybody. Any lack of sleep makes everything worse. And so if you're not getting a good night's rest, you're not getting good regulated sleep, you will be dysregulated and your ADHD will be worse. Okay. So that's a really big key. I think another thing is to watch your diet, because there's certain foods, certain types of things in foods that will trigger symptoms to be worse. So whether it's gluten, whether it's carbs, whether it's sugar, whatever it is that certain, just to look at your diet to see how might that be triggering me and making me have my 3 o'clock slump, or, when I'm drained because I'm eating high sugar cereal or breakfast or whatever, so that I'm kind of bottoming out by 10. So I think looking at diet is a really big thing. And then to make sure that, people who are happiest in their work environment are in work environments that match their personality. So if you are dissatisfied in your work environment, you're just always feeling attacked, you're never feeling productive, you might have a mismatch between your personality and your work setting.
That's good.
So, you know, when people ask me, oh, I want to be a psychologist, should I be a psychologist? Well, lots of people can be a psychologist, but you want to make sure that you're in the right area of psychology, you know, because social work might be best for you. Maybe research psychology might be best for you. Maybe this might be best. So, you know, same thing with in the workplace, regardless of your work setting, is that sometimes people are in the wrong role or in the wrong setting. So you really want to make sure of that, because you're more likely to be successful and happy if you have an environment that matches your personality, whatever it is, blue collar, white collar, professional, whatever it is, that if you're not in that right position, you know, even if you're a delivery truck driver, but maybe your personality is more for management. So you should be managing that place, not driving the truck. So, you know, looking at all of that, that you might be in the right setting, but not in the right role, or you may just be in the wrong setting, period. And that will make your ADHD worse.
So definitely bringing up some self-awareness.
Yes.
What's going on with me at work? How do I experience work, you know, physiologically? Because sometimes our body lets us know how we feel before we even, you know, are aware of it. You know, so if there's tightness, if there's, you know, it's difficulty to get up in the morning, if you're feeling extra anxiety or frustration, then maybe it's time to reevaluate. Like you said, maybe it's not necessarily the place, it could be the position. And sometimes it is the place altogether.
Exactly. And then, like you mentioned earlier, Farah, is that also about mindfulness, is that whatever you're doing, be mindful of it, be intentional, be aware. So then that way you're staying not too focused, but not under focused, and you're just being present. So you're not always thinking 5 steps ahead. You're actually looking at, what am I doing right now? What is the purpose of what I'm doing? You know, I'm noticing this, and you're just being mindful and present and intentional, and you'll be much more productive. And not lose time because of that. And that makes a huge, huge difference.
Yes. Those are great tips. And I think that another reason why I'm loving doing these collaborative videos is because mental health is, you know, does not need to have a stigma.
No.
You know, we recognize, you know, mental health is this life. Everyone, like you said, has their quirks, has their issues. We all have our own stories. You know, some don't necessarily require a diagnosis.
No.
But we all have things that affect us in certain ways. And specifically today in our conversations, like, what does a particular mental health issue such as ADHD, how does it impact us in the workplace, you know, if I'm that individual that has that? And so I just would love to continue to have videos like this where we can have a conversation so that people can go like, oh, that's me. And I'm not saying watch this video and diagnose yourself.
Don't do that.
Please do not diagnose yourself, but to be able to go and have, again, you know, Dr. Ann-Louise and I really are trying to help other people have more empathy and compassion in the world.
Yes.
And you know, so when you can understand, like, oh, you know, they're hyper focused, or you know, their inability to focus because of sensory awareness, how much more compassionate, how much more effective do you think that individual could be if you can kind of come alongside them as a coworker or as their boss? So I am so grateful that you took the time out, even though we had some tech issues, for us to do this. So can you share with the audience how they can contact you, or how they can get more information about what you do?
Yeah, of course. So again, my name is Dr. Ann-Louise Lockhart, and I am the owner and president of A New Day Pediatric Psychology in San Antonio, Texas. And they can find me online at anewdaysa.com. So that's anewdaysa as in San Antonio.com. And look for my information. And I also am on Instagram and Facebook as well, and LinkedIn, and they can find all my information and inspirational and educational stuff on there.
Yes, her stuff is phenomenal, and that is kind of how we connected, that we were just really loving each other's content. So, you know, please check her out. I definitely will put her information in the comment section so that you'll know how to reach Dr. Ann-Louise. And if you have any questions about this video, please add comments and questions below. And until the next video, see you soon and have a great one.
Thank you.